All right, welcome to all our viewers. My name is Alex, and I'll be hosting today's discussion on regulations that came in power at the beginning of this year in Europe, and more specifically, the Anti-Money Laundering Directive from January 2020. Here with me are experts in the field of blockchain and crypto regulations, and I'm going to introduce them shortly, after which they're going to have their own pieces and give more insights into what is going on with regulations and who is affected by them in Europe. First, we have Ivars Zukovskis, who is the CCO of bitFlyer Europe. And he's going to give a bit of history about the company, how it navigated the changing landscape of regulations in Europe, and what the future holds for exchanges and regulations related to them. Then we have Raido Saar, who's the compliance officer and co-CEO of Piixpay. And he's going to give a variety of attitudes towards crypto in EU countries, the challenges that are unique to fiat, to crypto providers, and the regulations for this kind of services. We have also here with us Robert Steinadler, who's the editor-in-chief at the Bitcoin Kurier. And he's going to talk about the crypto news industry, comment about the willingness of regulators and other officials to interact with crypto sites, as well as the censorship on content creators and that they face. And also here we have with us Nicolay Demchuk, who is a crypto lawyer and a lawyer in general, but also a fintech specialist. And he'll talk more about the conflicts between laws and the crypto industry, and specifically provide more information about speculation of laws that might be implemented in the future and why. So today, this event is hosted by CryptoMood. It's the fundamental analysis tools provider for superior trading decisions. I would like to welcome all our viewers to tweet with @CryptoMood and using the hashtags Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for the chance to win $100. The best question wins the $100 in cryptocurrency of their choice. We suggest Bitcoin. So tweet your questions using the @CryptoMood with hashtag Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. All right, let's get down to business. We're going to start with Ivars Zukovskis, and he's going to talk more about bitFlyer Europe, its history, and he has a very nice presentation ready for us. So I'm hoping everyone participates with questions so that at the end we have a nice discussion as well. Go ahead, Ivars.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alex, for the kind introduction, and I'm happy and delighted to have the opportunity to speak today in front of all of you and share some of my experience with bitFlyer. So give me a second. I'll try to launch my presentation so that everyone can see it. 1 second. There we go. All right. So I will talk about bitFlyer. bitFlyer is actually a group of entities. We have our headquarters in Tokyo. We have an office in San Francisco and one office in Luxembourg, where I'm personally based. bitFlyer Japan is registered as a virtual currency exchange operator. bitFlyer US is licensed in 46 states, including the New York's BitLicense. And bitFlyer Europe is also a regulated payment institution in Luxembourg under the supervision of CSSF. So we are currently the only exchange that is actually regulated and licensed on 3 continents worldwide. And recently in Luxembourg, apart from having a kind of a more traditional license as a payment institution, there was a kind of a crypto-specific registration framework introduced, such as the VASP registration framework. Obviously, this is nothing new for us as a regulated entity because we've been licensed since 2018. So the VASP framework for us is more kind of a formality, which we obviously applied for because this is a regulatory need and obligation. But just to give you a kind of a comparison between what it means to be a regulated entity and an entity subject to the VASP registration. So this is a snapshot from our regulator's website. And here's the list of applicable legislation for VASPs in Luxembourg. So you can see that there's just one regulatory text, which is the amended money laundering directive, which introduced a few definitions related to virtual currencies, virtual assets, and virtual asset service providers, and also called for the need to register with the CSSF. And here's, in comparison, a list of legislations applicable to payment institutions. As you can see, there's way more regulatory texts, all sorts of circulars, laws, regulations, guidances, FAQs, etc. And it's definitely way more than just being subject to money laundering obligations. So yeah, being compliant is definitely not easy, especially when you add to the kind of traditional regulation a mix of cryptocurrencies. It all makes things more different and more difficult. So I'll try to give some tips and maybe break down a few things related to regulation today. So when we talk about the fifth money laundering directive, I think that was kind of a game changer for the industry in Europe. I know a lot of entities were actually looking forward to some form of regulation or some form of clarity from their home regulators. So now we have a framework set up in Europe. So just a brief table summary of what was more kind of on a voluntary or non-mandatory basis before, and what actually changed with the introduction of the fifth money laundering directive. As you can see, things like risk assessment, customer due diligence, record keeping, enhanced due diligence, ongoing due diligence, anti-money policies and trainings, internal and external audits, transaction monitoring tools became mandatory. Specifically, I'd like to highlight also the suspicious activity reporting, which was not possible before without the directive in place, because normally entities that are not supervised or regulated cannot report to the FIU. So now this has become an opportunity and an obligation at the same time. Similarly, at the same time, record keeping, there were no specific requirements before that. Now at least it has to be for 5 years. Companies need to maintain records of their customers, of their transactions and their activity. 5 years is the minimum, so it can vary from member state to member state. And lastly, transaction monitoring, while not explicitly advocating for blockchain analytics tools, it does say in the law that companies need to have adequate transaction monitoring. And if you're a company, if you're a blockchain company, adequate would most likely mean having some tools like elliptic chain analysis or score chain or whatever. There's a handful of these companies out there to use them to monitor your blockchain transactions. In comparison, and also to give kind of a wider perspective, if you're a regulated company, apart from anti-money laundering requirements, you have a handful of other things. Like there are specific requirements related to finances. We're subject to capital adequacy obligations and management of our own company's assets and liabilities. Specifically, which I'd like to highlight, is also safekeeping of and safeguarding of customer assets. I'll talk about it a little bit more in the context of also Japanese framework, because they're a bit way more advanced than the situation here in the EU at the moment. Also, there are all variety of governance requirements, starting from regulatory reporting, and you would not believe how many reports I need to file on a regular basis to our regulator. Normally, at the beginning of the year, the first 3 months, it's just basically me working on a handful of various reports, collecting data, preparing, visualizing it, and submitting to the regulators. We are under the obligation to have various internal system controls. There are managements of conflicts of interest. You need to also take account of the advertising and marketing that you release. You have to have sophisticated governance framework internally. All the decision making needs to go through formal processes, etc. These things need to be documented and auditable in the end. About the anti-money laundering and KYC requirements, I already spoke about. So there's a handful of things that we're subject to, but that's, as you can see, just a small bit or just one part of the bigger picture. There are also risk requirements, and not only do we need to conduct a risk assessment of our own customers, we also have to look at the risk on a more kind of enterprise level, where we need to factor market liquidity, investment, credit, operational risk, fraud risk, etc. So there are a lot of factors to consider here. And there are many more other categories involved, like outsourcing requirements, IT obligations, etc., which are also written in the law and which we as a regulated company need to comply with. So here I would like to share a few insights of what is commonly identified by regulators when they perform on-site visits and do on-site audits of institutions. And there are generally 4 categories where companies quite frequently fail. So I'll start with customer enterprise risk management. Quite often companies do not know what the risk appetite is and have not performed any risk assessment on the enterprise level. And even if they have done that, they might have done it like 5 years ago, and obviously the risk landscape has changed and the identified risks are no longer relevant. Moreover, quite often the methodology used is not adequate or is not aligned with the applicable laws. And lastly, which is I think a bit specific to Luxembourg, but we have here in Luxembourg an obligation to have a formal sign-off for high-risk customers. So whenever we onboard a high-risk corporate or individual, I personally, as a CCO or any other chief executive officer, needs to approve that customer. It has to be a manual process, which is a bit cumbersome given the regular onboarding volumes. But that's just a specificity of Luxembourg regulation. In addition, when we talk about customer due diligence, there are quite often a lot of failures here. First of all, obviously, not being able to collect sufficient KYC documents on your customers, and even if collecting documents, not being able to understand those documents or appropriately interpret them, especially when you're onboarding corporate customers. You not only need to just do a tick box approach and collect the minimum requirements, you also need to understand the business of your customer, and you need to ask the right questions and perhaps ask for the right documents as well. Also, having lack of source of wealth or source of funds destinations and proof of that is a common problem. Moreover, when we talk about KYC, this is not just a one-time exercise. This actually needs to be carried out periodically. And there's more or less kind of an industry standard that you review KYC for your high-risk customers on an annual basis. You check your medium customers every 2 years, and you revise your low-risk customers every 3 years. Also, failures relate to not applying enhanced due diligence. Again, if you're onboard a high-risk customer, that means that you need to ask a bit more than standard KYC information. You need to perform enhanced due diligence. If it's a politically exposed person or a high-risk business, then you need to drill down a little bit deeper and identify a bit more information to be able to appropriately manage the risk that you're exposed to. When we talk about activity monitoring and reporting, again, there are multiple different failures here. Sometimes companies don't have appropriate tools to monitor the risks, or compliance teams are not sufficiently involved. If we talk about screening of customers, again, this is not a one-time exercise on the onboarding stage. You need to do it actually on an ongoing basis. You have to screen your customers basically daily or whenever the database that you're screening for is updated, especially if your home regulator has any specific lists and issues instructions to freeze assets of certain individuals, then your system needs to rescreen your database against that information. Again, when it comes to filing suspicious activity reports, and this became very essential now with the Fifth Money Laundering Directive for all VASPs, you need to make sure that you are able to identify suspicious activity timely and also report it without delay. And yeah, make sure that you actually file it, because among the failures, just like failing to report to the FIU. And lastly, it's the lack of resources within the compliance function. So quite often, and for a very long time, compliance was seen as a kind of a cost-generating department because it doesn't really generate revenue, even though if you look at it from a different perspective, where the compliance team and having a strong compliance program prevents all sorts of penalties and charged to the company for failure to comply, still quite often compliance teams are neglected. They either have not necessary or sufficient resources or are unable to have budget for sufficient controls and programs in place to be able to manage the compliance risk. So that's also quite frequently among the problems. And that can be challenging for now for new VASPs, so for new companies that have just launched their business. Investing a lot in various tools can be quite expensive because having advanced KYC technology, transaction monitoring technology, fraud monitoring technology, all of this requires money and increases the cost of onboarding new users. But in the end, if you build a scalable system, you'll be better off, because if you have kind of a very manual program of checking customers, when you have a lot of customers, you won't simply be able to manage your risks. So to kind of survive the fifth money laundering directive, you have to build a strong compliance program, and the strong compliance program stands on 4 pillars. It's having internal controls, which is your policies and procedures that are aligned with the law. It's the internal audit, which you can do by yourself in-house, but make sure that it is independent, or preferably hire a third-party firm that will do the internal audit for you. You have to have a designated compliance officer who is kind of a middleman between the company and the regulator, who will take care of your compliance and make sure that the regulator is happy. And you also have to perform anti-money laundering training for your employees on a regular basis, at least annually. You have to train them about your company's compliance program, about the threats, about the tools the company uses, and about all the threats that the company faces specifically in your business area. So now I'll talk a little bit about Japanese and Luxembourg experience. So as I mentioned, the company was actually was founded in Japan, and our headquarters is in Japan. So there are a few differences, and obviously the regulation in Japan is a bit more established and more advanced than it is in Europe, because it's been around for quite a while. First of all, the registration and the definition of a VASP sort of was introduced in Japan already in April 2017, while in Luxembourg we have it only this March in 2020. When it comes to customer protection rules, such as complaint resolution, transparency of information, disclaimers, etc., this is all part of the regulator framework specifically for crypto businesses, while for VASPs in Luxembourg, this is out of scope, only for regulated firms. Asset segregation, again, same thing. In Japan, they have provisions both for crypto asset segregation and fiat, which I will also talk a little bit more on the next slide. In EU, especially in Luxembourg, again, asset segregation obligations are only for already regulated entities like traditional financial institutions, not for VASPs, which are only subject to anti-money laundering regulation. External audit, again, wide scope requirements, including asset segregation. In Luxembourg, this is now only for anti-money laundering. If you're a VASP, if you're a financial institution, again, this is nothing new. You are subject both to internal and external audits, which cover all aspects of operations of the company. Also in Japan, there is a requirement for separate license to operate derivatives business with cryptocurrencies. You need to have a type 1 financial instruments business operator license. In Luxembourg and in general in EU, it falls under the MiFID type of licensing. And lastly, for KYC and anti-money laundering applications, quite the same. There might be some kind of differences specific to the jurisdiction, but overall approach is more or less equivalent. And just to talk a little bit more about asset segregation, and this is again where I think Japan is quite advanced in terms of defining the requirements. So what Japan is obliged to, and any exchange operating in Japan has to do, is to first of all separate customer assets into a cold wallet, and roughly 95% of all customer assets in crypto has to be kept in a cold wallet. Also, moreover, you have to, in general, have cold wallets for each crypto that you provide in your exchange. That's like the ideal scenario. And then the remaining you can keep on hot wallet for operational needs to process withdrawals, for example. But at the same time, the company from its own reserve, from its own assets, need to have an equivalent amount in a cold wallet storage that is equal to the hot wallet customer crypto amount. So and it's quite strict in Japan. So for us, for bitFlyer, it's quite imperative to comply with this. And it also brings a lot of protection to customers. So I think that's quite beneficial. I'd like to see something similar as well be introduced in Europe. So what does the future hold? So what's there for crypto in EU? So quite recently, bitFlyer made a poll where we questioned around 10,000 people across Europe in 10 countries. And we asked a simple question: will cryptocurrencies be around in 10 years? And we had a 66% positive response, where Italy took the lead with 72 respondents being positive, and UK being the most pessimistic here with 56 respondents. This is actually a 3% increase from the previous year. To me, this is indicative that cryptocurrencies are becoming known and widespread and going a bit into mainstream, and we can be confident that they're not going to go away, especially with all the regulatory talks and all the regulated advancements. It's already here. Perhaps we're not going to use Bitcoin for payments maybe in 10 years, but it's definitely going to remain as a financial instrument, and the cryptocurrency will become an integral part of the financial system. So I would like to give you sort of my 3 predictions for the next 3 years for the crypto space in Europe. First of all, the infamous travel rule, which has been debated and discussed a lot through the last year after the FATF publication and guidance last June in 2019. So right now there are various discussions, there are solutions proposed, but still there are no strict requirements among regulators that would like to enforce the travel rule. But I think in 3 years' time, we'll definitely not only have a more or less workable solution, this would also be more stricter on a regulatory level, and regulators would be keen on pushing this and making sure that the companies comply. There are a lot of technical challenges with this because communicating originator and beneficiary information with the transaction is quite complex technically, and you have to have all the industry participate in this protocol, and it's difficult to understand which wallet belongs to Avast, which does not. But I think we will have solutions come in place, and we simply will be obliged to comply. Second thing that I think is that while we have the 6th money laundering directive upcoming, what will happen is that the anti-money laundering framework in EU will convert to regulation, similarly as we have GDPR, for example, because even though the money laundering directive, the 5th one, had to be transposed and came into force on the 10th of January, the problem is that not all member states actually transposed it fully. Again, Luxembourg is an example that even in March, it's only partially transposed. So to be more effective, I think in that sense, the directive would be converted to regulation so that everyone has to comply straight away, leaving no room for interpretations, but at least introducing more harmonization. And lastly, now we have a lot of vast frameworks across many jurisdictions. So only now it's just registration and subjecting companies to anti-money laundering. But I think that framework will be converted to regulation or to kind of wider requirements than we have now, because many companies that operate in this sphere are operating more or less a traditional business model with just this kind of aspect of dealing with cryptocurrencies. So I think it's just a matter of time when this turns into a more sophisticated regulation. That's it for me. I'll leave you with a quote from unknown wise compliance man, who said at some point that companies do not get fined for money laundering. Companies get actually fined for failing to have adequate policies, the right procedures, and the ability to follow those policies and procedures. I've ran this quote in front of regulators, and they did agree that that is the case. So in case you have policies derived from the law, procedures derived from the policies, and your staff is adequately trained and follows the procedures, you should be safe to go, because nobody can eradicate money laundering completely. It's still going to slip through somehow, through the cracks. But as long as you have this program in place, then you should be on the safe side. Otherwise, you need to put a lot of emphasis on making sure that your program is adequately structured. That's it for me. I'd be happy to answer some questions once we have the Q&A session. Thank you very much. I'll leave the floor to other panelists now.
Thank you, Ivars. The presentation was super interesting. I think Europe has a lot to take from Japan and learn from them as well. For me specifically, and for the viewers, I think it's important to know why. For example, because of all the reasons you mentioned, companies fail, these 4 specific reasons. All of them seem like it's because businesses are overlooking the importance of compliance internally. And one of your recommendations at the end was, pay more attention to compliance. But for the viewers who are now watching, who are going to present this information to others in their team and the companies, how do you think they should get their attention and really help them understand that it's actually related to the revenue in the end of the day? And how would you say that the best way to transfer this information is?
Thank you. That's actually an excellent question. Well, I am fortunate to have the management that really understands the importance of compliance, so I don't have to do a lot of convincing. But I believe that's not the case in every institution. I think what really works well in these circumstances is just to show some statistics or show some information about the recent fines for failures in anti-money laundering specifically, because that's where the biggest fines are. Just showing that and saying that that can be a cost which nobody wants to budget for the future should already be a good motivator for a company to kind of provide a little bit of budget, extra budget for compliance tools. Additionally, I think it's also very important to explain to management that building a program that's scalable is very important, because you might invest a little bit more now, but you'll have to invest way less later on once your business grows. Because otherwise, if your program relies on human interactions and human labor, you won't be able to grow your team quickly enough to address the growing volumes of your company. And then changing legacy systems is just a nightmare. So I think it's very important to talk to management, because the tone has to come from the top. And it's also, it kind of comes down to the skills of the person you have in charge as a compliance officer, and his kind of persuasive abilities to convince the management.
Thanks. I think that was a great answer. So I would like to remind all the webinar viewers to tweet their questions using @CryptoMood and the hashtags Bitcoin and hashtag cryptocurrencies for a chance to win $100 in crypto for the best questions. At the end, we're going to select which best question is. Now we're going to continue with our next interesting speaker. He's going to talk more about Piixpay and the variety of attitudes towards cryptocurrencies in the European countries, as well as what challenges are unique to the fiat crypto providers, the insights for these services and their demand over the last few years and into the future. I would like to welcome Raido, who is going to continue from here.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for introduction. Also, thank you, Ivars, for this very thorough overview about the regulations all over the world. Yes, it's very impressive that you are, let's say, listed in 3 continents all over the world, and your words about becoming more similar to Japan is a little bit frightening, because as I saw, their regulations are really tougher than they are at the moment in Europe. But you actually took most of the words and most of the slides I wanted to present about AMLD5. So thank you very much. So I can do it a little bit shorter, and I have no need to show the same slides you already showed, because actually you concluded it pretty nicely. A couple of words about Piixpay. Piixpay is actually has a trademark on the market already 5th year, and we have seen the changing of regulations through those years, and according to those changes, we have been changing our platform as well. So on the second half of 2018, we understood that actually, even if the law will allow it, it's not possible to serve customers which have not going through full KYC. We switched on mandatory KYC with our KYC partner, that time Berif, Estonian startup, and it resulted with 84% of all of signing up new customers. We were pretty worried because, first of all, we wanted to avoid fraudsters to use our service, but we wanted to have new customers anyway. But we faced the problem that many our customers, it was only less than 2 years ago, weren't interested to show their documents and to identify themselves in normal level. But surprisingly, next month, all the customers were back. So it was a shock probably for many of our customers, because we all coming from the era when Bitcoin was supposed to be something peer-to-peer, something giving you privacy, that you can hold your assets in your control, doing your dealings inside a trustless environment where you don't need third trusted party, which will give you credibility. But as law moves tough and becomes tougher and tougher, then as you saw from Ivars' slide, that during AMLD4 and comparing AMLD4 to AMLD5, most aspects which used to be voluntary are now mandatory, and that's what it is. And when AMLD5 was forced on 9th of July 2018, it obliged the member states of the European Union to modify their regulations by the January 20, 2020. So the move from toward the tougher regulations is, as we see, it's happening. And as crypto market cap is growing, and it's already significant enough to affect not only people, but organizations and markets. And of course, Big Brother wants to have his own cut. So Piixpay was going on with those changes of regulations, and that's why a big part of last 2 years we have been actually implementing our internal procedures into machine. So as Ivars said, it's very important to have capability to monitor your transactions and customers' transactions. It's utmost important that you can do it automatically, that machine knows how to detect irregular transactions and how to introduce to machine when and how it has to react to some kind of transactions, even if it's only a risk level rise. And then it's so important because our manpower is not capable of doing that, or otherwise we are not scalable at all. So instead of coming out and coming live with new services, our 2 last years, we really focused on implementing those changes into the machine, building a fraud detection engine, also transaction monitoring engine. And with those tools, now we are capable of trusting our platform that if there is no alert, it means that all risk aspects are in the level that the transactions can move automatically. Because without those automatizations, we are not able to scale and onboard more customers. As coming to Estonia and regulations, as you know, Estonia used to have around 3,000 licenses last year. And then in expectation of AMLD5 regulations being enforced in Estonia, Estonian regulators were starting to change our regulations, and also our financial intelligence unit started to clear the market. So today, it's much more complex to open a crypto company in Estonia. And if you do, it is really coming with different set of rules than it used to be even last year. For us who are owning those Estonian licenses, actually they are registrations, but those registrations now are really tough to obtain, as the regulations have been turned up. But to give you some statistics, I took it from Estonian Financial Intelligence Unit, and they discovered me information that since the end of the last year has been cancelled 487 virtual asset exchange licenses and 456 virtual currency wallet offering licenses. So basically 500 companies have been losing their licenses, because it's very regular that Estonian companies which were sold here like shell companies, they had both licenses, and the price of those companies varied from 800 euros to 1,200 euros. Of course, for 1,200 euros, you already got it what you're really supposed to have with all regulations and all the paperwork done for this certain company. But actually, even this is not enough in today's legal environment. Today's legal environment, as we have been discussing with Estonian Financial Intelligence Unit, this is what they meant is that if we have in Estonia so many registered companies which have crypto registrations, then they will bring us, they will hurt us in PR level so bad if those companies are letting money laundering happening, that that this is not just acceptable for Estonian Republic. So they started to think how to change it, and they had negotiations and consultations with Estonian cryptocurrency associations, and we tried to give them our own practical view how to change the regulations. And they explained us in layman's terms that what they really expect from those companies which are having Estonian regulations, registrations. So the main thing is that I really want that the company dealing with virtual assets will have office in Estonia, and they have AML officers working in Estonia, getting paid in Estonia, and they are reachable for them, because their main problem is that there are many companies which have Estonian registration and they don't have even contact person who they can reach. And also today, before our webinar, I talked to a financial intelligence unit, and they said that even companies which have lost their licenses, they are still operating and showing on their websites that they have this license, which actually is already revoked. So they are worried that those companies are out of their reach and in the different legal environment, so they cannot actually even do their duty to keep an eye and control those companies. So when AMLD 5 regulations were put in force in Estonia on 10th of March this year, it came with pretty big changes in requirements of the law. And if it used to be 300 euros opening fee for a crypto company, then now it's 3,000. Minimum required capital for such a company is 12,000 euros. And of course, the main question is that AML officer must be really on the level, and it must be someone who really has experience on the field. As I have been working in my life 7 years in border guard department in border intelligence, so I pretty much understand how they think and what they expect from service providers. So having this inside view, I understand what they expect from us, but also I understand that there are many things which are still unclear for the regulators, and they need practical input from companies who are providing virtual asset services. So when new regulations were to put in force in Estonia, we had meetings in cryptocurrency associations, and many foreign companies had like real issues with how they can continue operating with Estonia regulations when they even have to give answers to regulators' questions in Estonian. It created a new kind of service that legal bureaus started to offer, so-called we will answer your compliance questions to regulator. It was pretty popular, I understand, but as you see, 500 companies failed to answer those questions, so they have been losing their registrations. But in meetings which were in Estonia, in crypto communities, really legal bureaus tried to offer like virtual AML officer services for companies which are actually not operating in Estonia and would like to keep those registrations. So in my view, it's something like that, if some hospital has a surgeon and he wrote the instruction how to perform a surgery, and then some other people are reading this manual and doing the surgery, I think that I wouldn't like to be such a patient in their table. But this is something similar what happens in a point of view of our regulator, that if you are buying in AML officer service, it's actually, from practical point of view, it's impossible, because this is ongoing. It's everyday job, and you really, those questions are everyday different, and you really have to know your practice. You have to know how your company operates. You have to understand the mechanics and inner view of your company. And this is not something that you can do like once a week. This is everyday job.
Thank you, Raido. That's great closing remarks. We're a bit short on time, but at the end, we're also going to take questions. I'm sure that there will be plenty for you as well to give us more input about the topic. I would like to remind also all the viewers to go on Twitter and tweet using the @CryptoMood and the hashtag Bitcoin, also hashtag cryptocurrency, for a chance to win $100 if you ask a question that would be chosen as the best question at the end of the Q&A session by our speakers. Next, I would like to also thank our media partners, Delta Heroes, the Capital.io magazine, Bitcoin Kurier, for their immense support and growth hacking ideas. We're going to continue with Robert Steinadler, who is the editor-in-chief at the Bitcoin Kurier. He'll talk about the crypto news industry, the censorship on content creators, and the willingness of regulators to work with content creators. I'll pass on the floor to you, Robert.
Thank you, and also thanks for the invitation. I like to keep it short. What I like to talk about is really the impact of regulation or missing regulation on crypto media. First, a couple of words about Bitcoin Kurier. I've started Bitcoin Kurier in 2018 as a blog. I am personally a GPU miner, or that was the way how I started with cryptocurrencies in general. So I wanted to start a blog, just about my experiences as a miner. And I figured that people came for news. So I developed Bitcoin Kurier into a news magazine and changed the direction. And crypto journalism or crypto media. What is crypto journalism in general? You have 4 groups in the field: influencers, podcasters, bloggers, and journalists. And the audience basically choose their favorite media on trust. Why is it so important to trust somebody in cryptocurrencies? People need a trusted source of information because the market is not regulated. It's a regular question to ask yourself, is a coin or a token legitimate? Is the developer trustworthy? Are exchanges scamming people for their money? Just remember Cryptsy or Mintpal or Mt. Gox. This isn't necessarily the case in a regulated environment. You don't need a credible source to estimate if a stock or a security is legitimate. This is already done by the regulatory bodies, right? So financial authorities oversee the market, and all those steps already have been taken. You just have to ask yourself, is the security good investment or not? So to me, the very job of crypto media is to inform the reader not only about current events, but it steps in and informs the audience about wrongdoings or malicious actors or IT-related security issues. Let's take a look at what to expect if you're trying to achieve this goal, and get some real information to inform the readers about what's going on. I'm going to start this in September 2018, when a court in Berlin ruled that Bitcoin is not a unit of account, currency, or e-money. Therefore, it was not covered by the German Banking Act. In effect, the defendant, the operator of Bitcoin24, a German Bitcoin exchange that was shut down in 2014, was a free man. But the most interesting part was that the court said that financial authorities weren't in charge in the first place. Sounds kind of convincing. The asset is not under the Banking Act, overseers have no saying, and the prosecution was wrong. But despite the fact that the court ruled that the BaFin, German regulatory body, made it clear that they are not in charge, their stance was, well, we cannot effectively prosecute with criminal charges, but we still hold the power to apply administrative law. And so our companies still need our approval and a license for their business. This was intriguing. And in the aftermath, many companies started to operate Bitcoin ATMs. You might have noticed that Germany hasn't many Bitcoin ATMs over all the years while this business was growing all over Europe and in the world. Germany was going dark, basically. So I spoke to one company, to a spokesperson there, and they made it clear that they are seeking a regulated environment and that they would like to comply. But yeah, there weren't any framework for them whatsoever. And also, since it was clear that they couldn't throw them into jail, they just started their business. And yeah, they went from there just to see what's going to happen. I tried to contact the BaFin about the same issue, and I found that they replied in a timely manner, also very polite, and they were aware of the issue, but instead to clarifying things, they simply just chose to reiterate their position on the matter and were completely ignoring the controversy. So the lack of communication from regulatory bodies was due to missing laws. Since the new laws came into effect, the situation have changed. Many regulations came into effect in March 2020 here in Germany, and they came along with AMLD5. And ever since, the situation has been more positive. BaFin is more, they are more communicating what to expect if you like to apply for a license. And of course, they also, excuse me, they also shut down all non-compliant Bitcoin ATMs. But this time, knowing that the law was fully on their side. So you see, it is not always easy to operate in this field, since a couple of things were more political issues than issues for the regulators themselves. So they hadn't the law on their side. They knew that new laws were in the making and that they were coming and that they were necessary. So they had to handle the situation somehow. At least that's what I figured out. Another sector where I think was about censorship. I wouldn't really call it censorship. As I said before, many people that belong to crypto media are influencers or bloggers. So they are dependent on social media, YouTube or Twitter or whatever. And those people get not banned because there's some kind of censorship going on. I would really think that this is fraud protection. We had difficult situations with Facebook ads. We had a couple of cases where YouTubers got their channels shut down. And most of that was also because, yeah, I guess because the whole thing isn't really well regulated nowadays. So the companies have somehow to make sure that malicious actors with shady advertisements or some kind of fraudulent offers, that they are banned from their platforms. And somehow this always ends up that you catch the wrong people. And in some cases, they have their channels shut down, or they're not capable of using regular advertisements because their crypto product is not deemed compliant. So this just a short outlook from me, and yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. There were some very nice points in there. I'm particularly interested actually in the regulation around basically content creators, and as you mentioned, also people who want to put out advertisements on Google Ads and Facebook as well. Do you think that the current regulation is sufficiently clear enough, for those companies to create basically a structure for accepting more players in the market to be able to use their services? It seems like even with the current explanations put out on the website, it's very vague, and the certification process that one has to go through just to be able to advertise on those platforms also doesn't seem to work easy or even like fast for the people who need it the most. So do you think the regulation is sufficiently clear for the companies to work with that, or is it just their reluctance to accept companies to come on board and advertise those companies?
Well, I guess that they just need to they need to open up to the whole thing, and I think that already has happened. So we had a couple of different situations, especially with Facebook. First, they allowed those ads, then they took a step back, and this was back and forth. And I think that this shows that there are insecurities, and I believe that the more the whole market gets regulated, the more they are willing to open up themselves to this matter.
Yes, yeah, of course. For me, it seems like if you look at the most influential media out there in this sector specifically, if you look at rankings like the Rise 100, Cointelegraph and CoinDesk are at the top of the influential media there, right? But when you go to websites, you also notice that a lot of the articles are actually sponsored, and it's small letters. You don't really pay attention to most of the time. But to me, it seems like that's the predominant part of the content on those websites. And, I'm not sure how informational that is, or how much it goes in the direction that you mentioned, that this kind of content creators should promote wrongdoings, malicious acts, rather than supporting companies that haven't been checked and only putting some, information from the lawyers that they were required to put, right? So to me, it seems like regulations are missing for those actors to play well. And it also seems like the content creators aren't going the right direction either. They're just trying to monetize the situation.
Well, I think we are also running sponsored content, but it's clearly visible. There is a disclaimer on top, and there's no way that our audience gets confused about what is an advertisement and what is an actual article. So I think this is an ethical question. Would you rather fool your readers into thinking that this is journalism, or would you just plainly and simply explain to them, well, this is an article we get paid for, we need to make a living, and this is the information that we would like to provide. Now, cryptocurrencies, especially cryptocurrencies, and this is widely criticized, are a field, or especially the crypto media, is a field where there is more marketing than journalism, which is basically true. There is also not many topics to talk about. You can have tech talk and talk about structure of a coin or a smart contract and upcoming updates or upgrades or whatever. You have talks about regulatory issues. What is the direction of the whole market? Where are we going? Are we going to see finally institutional money or whatever coming with new products and regulation? And the third thing that you have is basically the same with news about the stock market. It's number go up or number go down. People are interested, highly interested, where the market is going in terms of price. So besides of these three things, and maybe some news that are entertaining about I don't know, from people on Twitter or I don't know, Craig Wright or something like that. Those things are really news. They are news related. There is a topic. Everything else is sooner or later driven by public relations. That is the case. But I don't think that this is only a point for crypto media, but perhaps for media in general. If you think about that, a lot of crypto media outlets are just mere influencers, right? And usual influencers, I don't know, they advertise for Gucci sweaters, and in cryptocurrency, they tell you if a project is trustworthy and what to do and how to react to changes on the market. And by the way, they're going to show you some ref links, and yeah.
Well, we never know if in the end of the day they don't own a piece of the coins and tokens in the background, you know. With the new regulation in place, you're gonna always have information about that. All right, thank you, Robert. We're gonna go forward with our next speaker. I would like to, before that, just remind the viewers to go on Twitter and use @CryptoMood as well as the hashtags Bitcoin and hashtag cryptocurrency for a chance to win $100 by asking questions that will be then reviewed by our speakers in the Q&A session at the end. And the best question wins $100 once again. So our next speaker, Nicolay Demchuk, and he'll discuss the conflicts between existing laws and cryptocurrencies and where this is going in the near future. I give you the word. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good day to everyone. I will start with a brief introduction of myself. So I finished the master's degree on IT law in Estonia, and then I had been working for 4 years in a law firm called NERD, which is a very strong technology law in Estonia. Right now, I do not represent any company, but I still help startup and fintech clients in Estonia to comply with Estonian and EU regulation. Mainly within these 4 years, I have been dealing with fintech clients or technology clients in blockchain and cryptocurrency field. And when I look back to 2016 and right now, there are actually a lot of changes related to legislation, but also there are many gray zones, or there are many technologies or situations which are still not regulated, and there is a big question whether the regulation needs to be in place at the moment or it's still too early. So I'm going to talk about my agenda is to cover 3 topics. The first one, I was given a conflict, but I would not call it a conflict. I would rather call it the challenges between the existing law and the technology. Let's put it this way. Another topic, I'm going to talk about the demand for legal services in cryptocurrency industry. And the third one is some predictions on the future law for cryptocurrency. So based on my experience, what I see that we have actually 2 sides that impact each other and pushes for the further development. It's either we have a new technology that already has a big impact on society, and regulators, legislator needs to act, needs to produce some new law, or we have a legislation that creates a new law, and the technology needs to adapt to this new regulation. The first challenge what I see, and what is still not really clear, is about smart contracts and whether it is the same, whether they have the same enforceability and the same legal status as a contract in electronic form or with a contract. Before starting about this, also let me tell you that I might be jumping from one jurisdiction to another because the legislation covering cryptocurrency is fragmented in European Union. We have, for example, I always highlight the 3 countries that have very different regulations. One, which is Estonia, and which is basically regulation. It's the AML extension. It's not anything new coming from the AML directive. Then we have Gibraltar that has a regulation which is based on principles, and this is a bit more comprehensive. And then we have very, very comprehensive regulation, which consists of 3 acts and which was adopted in Malta. So I'll be jumping around these countries. So about smart contracts. So far, taking into consideration most of the countries and also Estonia, it does not really fulfill the requirement to be considered to be like a written contract or contract which is concluded in the electronic form that might be enforceable, for example, in a court. Because of the 2 issues. The first one is when you are going into the contract, you usually need to know the parties or your counterparty with whom you're actually concluding the contract. And the second issue is a signature. About the first issue, usually smart contracts and how it's included based on public key infrastructure. There is a public key, private key, you sign it, and the contract is done. Most of the case, you do not know who is actually this counterparty that is also signing the contract. But this problem might be solved because it's possible, and right now there are also many exchanges and the service providers that are also doing KYC. So if you know, for example, that you're going to into the contract with a person, and you can also know who is this person, so some KYC provider or online KYC or offline KYC, then it's okay. But the second issue is coming about electronic signature. And in Europe, we have IDOS regulation that actually says what are those signatures that have the highest security that can be used to sign digitally documents, etc. In Estonia, it is Estonian digital signature. It's a chip that we have in our IDs, which actually gives you this private key to sign documents, and it's considered to be the same status as you sign the documents manually. But when it comes to smart contracts, also using public key infrastructure, it lacks the central authority that actually gives certificates for trust providers to sign those documents, because it's actually decentralized nature. So here we have a first conflict where we can say that maybe IDOS regulation infringes the principles of technology neutrality or principles of functional equivalence, because in the end of the day, public key infrastructure that's used by smart contracts is the same secure level as any other trust providers certified by in accordance with those regulations, but smart contracts are not considered to have the same level of signature as those trust providers. Another challenge that I see when it comes to cryptocurrency, of course, it's blockchain, because usually cryptocurrency are built on blockchain, use blockchain system, and GDPR regulation data protection. Starting from actually who is the data controller and who is the data processor. This is the node. is the data subject. Also about the theoretical scope of the GDPR, because we know that it applies to companies that are registered in European Union or those companies that offer its services or products or process the data of the European Union residents. Since nodes are usually based all over the world, and they might process your public key, which is also considered to be a pseudo-anonymous data and considered to be personal data, it's rather difficult to limit the scope or actually to know whether your personal data, if you based in your opinion, will go beyond the theoretical scope. So this is another challenge. And of course, when it comes to GDPR, it's also right to amend, right to be forgotten, and right to data portability, which considering, for example, public blockchain, permissionless blockchain, it's rather so far not possible to fulfill. Because as you know, the data that is in the blockchain is not corruptible. It's not possible to go back in the past and change something or add something. Another challenge that I see right now, it's very sexy actually, topic is about guidance made by FATF about travel rules for virtual asset service providers or for cryptocurrency exchange and cryptocurrency custodian wallet providers. It was adopted in June last year, so it's already 1 year since it was adopted, and it was actually a deadline also 1 year, so it should have been actually all those companies need to follow it, FATF is just a guidance, but if the national state implements the guidance into the national legislation, the countries need to be ready actually to fulfill this requirement. And this is fair from the point of view that right now all financial institutions such as payment institutions, e-money institutions, banks are already doing this. When they with their funds, they often transact some data on the customer, its name, address, ID code, etc. But this is the case where legislation impacts technology, because right now, and there are many developments going on, one of which is IVMC 110, when the technology needs to work on and to create something new actually to fulfill this requirement, to be able with the funds transferred in blockchain also transfer some personal data, such as usually when it comes to originator, its name, its account number, identity number, date of birth, and the address. So let's see how it will be. So far, I know only about this. There are many groups that are working on this, and in blockchain, we have different blockchains. How it's possible actually to do it, complicated. Another hot topic here, when it comes to cryptocurrency in particular, we have, first of all, a cryptocurrency is ideal word, then we have tokens, which might have different nature, and depending on the nature of the legislation, will also apply. And then we have a new, very popular phenomenon right now is stablecoins that are very popular to use. And many people, and there were also some allegations from the competent authority all over the world that stablecoins most probably or have the features of e-money. And again, if it's considered to be a money, then it's totally different. Regulation applies much more burdensome than those that applies for virtual currency service providers, because it's a share capital. If you're talking about European Union and e-money directive, which is 350,000 euros, much more strictly in terms of AML, KYC compliance, etc. So at the moment, I do not see very clear if we can say that the e-money can be, that stablecoin can be e-money, but there is a law. There are 3 requirements saying that usually it's a fund that's stored on electronic medium and then represent the claims against the issuer. Usually it's issued by par value. It it is a payment instrument and it is accepted by someone else except the issuer. So if these requirements are fulfilled, there is a reason stablecoins might actually fall under not a cryptocurrency regulation, but the regulation of e-money, which is related to like representation of fiat money. I will not talk so deeply about the other topics. I'm just mentioning it because it's rather not related to cryptocurrency, but something which is beyond, which is about investment. Is equity tokens and shares. Is it the same? How is it possible to implement? Because so far there is no infrastructure to actually do IPO fully issued by tokens. And there are also different point of view on cryptocurrency derivatives. Some countries say that it fulfills the national legislation and it must be regulated. Licensed investment for the investment period must be obtained. Others has as a gray zone, say nothing. About the demand of legal services in the cryptocurrency sphere, I see it, even though because cryptocurrency has been without all the 12 years. Many were saying before it's a bubble. We see it's not. It has its needs in the financial market. It has its customers. It's not that much of use by many ordinary people as it was expected before. So this is actually the biggest problem right now, that not a lot, but like very little people actually use cryptocurrency, let's to be honest. But it has its niche. It's somehow very slowly developing, and it will be on the market. And since it's also developed, more regulation comes into place, there is a more actually legal work for lawyers. And I feel this demand because right now I'm like not working for a law firm, but I constantly get inquiries from different fintech to help with the law, and they always say, "Do you know what is stablecoin? Do you know what is blockchain? Do you know how it works?" There is also was the case when I was approached by consulting companies saying that they got a very experienced compliance officer into their cryptocurrency exchange, but he has only experience with the traditional banks institutions. He does not really understand technology, so we would need some consulting to him to actually explain what is cryptocurrency, what are the risks there, stuff like this. And about the prediction for the future,
closing remark, Nicolay, like about the predictions, and we can also move to the questions because there is a lot of questions from the audience.
Okay. What's the future? What I see that it will be more regulation related to cryptocurrency, especially in terms of, for example, if we talk about European Union level, there is only AML-based, like AML requirements. I think that we will see more disclosure requirements for cryptocurrency service provider and requirements related to securities, such as like IT systems, which is very well actually written by Maltese Mutual Financial Asset Act. And I think that this is very, very good and comprehensive regulation, but at the same time very costly for businesses. So that's why most of the businesses are leaving Malta. So basically it's it. I think that what it needs to be done, that whatever regulation comes, it needs to fulfill the principle of technology neutrality. It should not hinder innovation. So I do not want to over-regulate this industry, but it's developing, and I think the pace of its development is actually good at the moment.
Great. Thank you for this nice summary of crypto and law relationships. I would like to say to everybody still listening to not forget to go on the iStore or Play Store and download CryptoMood, the fundamental app for analyzing sentiment in the crypto market. Try it out and tell us if you like it. Also, go on Twitter, and for the last chance to submit your questions that will be asked in the Q&A in a few minutes. The best question wins $100, and we'll select the best question at the end of the Q&A. So stay tuned to see if you win $100 in cryptocurrency. Now, I'm going to start asking the questions. And for the speakers, if you would like to just volunteer who wants to answer the question, if that basically would be it. That would be much easier than if we all go in rounds and answer the same question. So just, raise your hand and if you want, just jump in and answer the question. So for all of you guys, given that you have all the experience and knowledge about compliance, do you think all the exchanges and small-time payment gateways in the EU are ready to comply with and enforce regulations? So who of the speakers would like to volunteer to jump on this question? Should I repeat it once more, maybe?
To be honest, please repeat the question because I didn't really get it.
Yes, okay. So given all the experience you have and knowledge about compliance, do you think all the exchanges and small-time payment gateways in the EU are ready to comply with and enforce such regulations? How ready do you think they are? All right, Raido, you raised your hand first. Go for it.
Yes, answer is very simple. No. We have already seen it in Estonia when, for example, companies, even trading companies, they are working with algorithm-based or bot-based trading. They used to be even non-obliged entities in the eyes of the law, but now they will not get the license because it's not enough if you have technical understanding of a platform, and the service might be very good, but it's not enough. They really require, at least in Estonia, that you have compliance officer, even better team, which daily basis is working with AML questions. So the future probably, as anonymity will be diminished even more than now, future will be that without, let's say, big machine behind your small service, you are not able to provide your service. And let's say for small service, it's not sustainable model.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Raido. That was a very good answer, I think. Let's see what people are also asking next. So what will happen to peer-to-peer crypto exchanges similar to local Bitcoin? Will they bow to regulations or die? Will the new regulations mean the end of the era of anonymity in crypto trading? Who is interested in answering that? Raido? Someone else? Okay, and Ivars, if you want, maybe just so that everybody speaks.
Yeah, maybe if I can jump in. So yeah, I actually know the CCO of local Bitcoin, so I know for them, like, adopting the new anti-money laundering directive was challenging. But I think my vision of the regulation is that for the whole industry to advance further in adoption and use cases, I think regulation is necessary, and some compliance with anti-money laundering requirements is just a necessity. Because without that, there will always be debate that cryptocurrencies are a gateway for money laundering, that they are used by criminals, and for us to change the reputation of the cryptocurrency industry, it's just imperative that the companies comply with the regulation. And when speaking about the peer-to-peer platforms, still KYC thresholds need to be established. Obviously, perhaps there are some not to say like loopholes, but some flexibility across EU that would allow, like, for example, simplified due diligence to be carried out, something that we do at bitFlyer, for example, where certain, the customer meets certain criteria. So there will be some kind of entry for customers that is quite easy and is not cumbersome in terms of KYC. But I still think that for us to see advancements, regulation is simply something that will happen.
All right. Thank you.
If I may add here that, as you all know, when you have been in crypto events or crypto symposiums all over the world, then there are people who really believe in the beginning of crypto and the meaning of the crypto and what Satoshi actually meant in his white paper to give people independent mean of payment or rule their assets. We are very far from that already. And there is a real threat for regulators that if they will turn this air if they close it too tightly, many of the businesses go under the floor. And when there was planning of change of Estonian crypto regulations, I told them, please don't start to regulate peer-to-peer crypto exchanges, because actually they can do their business without you knowing it. If as stronger will be the laws, the darker they go, and it's probably the way that if regulator turns it over, then many of such businesses will just disappear from the radar.
Great, thanks. Thanks for the input, Raido. The next one, a bit shorter. Does AMLD5 affect me if I'm not a European citizen?
AMLD5 is a directive, and it needs to be transported into national law of every country, and it applies for businesses. And the question is about individual. The question is not really clear. But if the business is based in a country where they need to conduct customer due diligence, then every customer needs to be KYC.
Thanks, Nikolay. Great answer. We'll move on to the next one. So what steps can small businesses take to thrive in this new crypto environment brought about by new regulatory requirements? So maybe just a quick take on what should be the action plan for a small business to not get caught too fast.
If I may start, because I also agree with Raido. I was working as a lawyer in Estonia, and what I see, and that many of those who have applied for the license and why many were revoked, it's not maybe even just because they were not ready to comply with the law. It is a reason, but there were many companies that were applying for these licenses without really understanding whether they need such a license, whether the service they provide actually falls under the license to be a virtual currency service provider. So this is one question. And many companies, I don't know why, but they have an image of Estonia that's very easily to come. Maybe it was also because it was created by many consulting companies that were very willing to sell to everyone those licenses. If you come to Estonia, you pay 10K, 15K, and you have a company with licenses and you can do business, which was partially true. The main true, and the licensing cost is not actually expensive. The most expensive cost in this business is to be ready to set up a good and process of AML and KYC, because this is for sure you need to outsource something. You need to have a team on board who will do it on a daily basis. And many of the businesses, they do not understand how important it is and how bothersome it is. So this is actually the main problem. And if you are going to open such a business which falls under the licensing or registration, be sure that you also need to have a good understanding of AML compliance and a good internal process in your company, how to actually do it on practice.
Great, thanks for that. So small businesses, prepare, invite a compliance officer before you do invite an HR officer to your company when starting out. I think that would be more important in the future, especially when hiring people, so that they know how to comply with everything once on board. Okay, so let's move on to another great question from the audience. Are there any records, database, or blacklists the exchanges share in order to prevent money laundering attempts on different exchanges? So is there a database that would help prevent money laundering attempts on different exchanges?
Yeah, actually, there's a topic that I would like to address. So that's actually a very, very interesting question. I think where the blockchain industry and the cryptocurrency exchanges are a little bit different from traditional finance institutions. There aren't, at least I'm not aware of like a known circulating blacklist of customers across exchanges, but there are several initiatives facilitated by the blockchain forensics tools, such as the elliptic chain analysis or alike. So unlike with traditional finance, obviously exchanging information through FIUs is not really possible, and you cannot like create blacklists. But what can happen on the blockchain with the analytics tools is that the fraudulent addresses can get flagged on the blockchain. And we as an exchange can also contribute. For example, if we identify a fraudster or a criminal on our exchange and he has used the wallet to process his coin transactions, we can actually flag it internally, and he also can communicate it to the kind of network or to the data set of the provider that we use for blockchain analytics. And that will be spread out across all their clients. So if, for example, a blockchain forensics tool has Coinbase, Kraken, some other large exchanges as clients, and they all submit their fraudulent addresses, if that person goes from one exchange to another and uses the same addresses, they will get flagged and their transaction will be probably stopped, or assets will be frozen, STRs will be filed. So I think this is a bit of a unique characteristic of the blockchain industry, that we can benefit from the network overall, which is not really possible with the existing traditional reporting means through the FIUs. Yes,
very nice point there. Thanks for this answer. We have a few more interesting questions, and I think it makes sense to go through all of them and then select the best question that was asked. Just to remind the viewers, you can still submit some questions if you would like on our Twitter, on Twitter using @CryptoMood and the hashtags Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So the next question is, one of our viewers is wondering, how do exchanges keep KYC AML documentation safe? I think Ivars also can answer here as well, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this as well. Well, this is nothing novel in terms of information security. I think that's the same principle applies for any bank or any other financial institution where you have an account or you use on a regular daily basis. So you have to have appropriate security and risk controls in place. You have to have a very good IT security team that can identify the vulnerabilities with your system. Again, in Luxembourg, there are specific IT infrastructure requirements on how the personal data needs to be kept safe in your platform, with all the security walls, isolated infrastructures, etc. So there's nothing super, there's no rocket science with this. This is quite similar to any financial institution in terms of requirements.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, anybody else maybe want to jump in, or we can move on? Okay, so the next question is if any of you expects that in order to comply with the new regulation, exchanges would be moving to other countries where no regulation and taxes are present at those jurisdictions, making them comply with basically the trustless crypto ideas. More, I don't know if you understood more or less the question. So do you expect exchanges to move to other countries because of this regulation? And what will be the reaction? Okay, Raido? Yeah.
Actually, it's like a dream. Yes, let's go somewhere where there are no laws. We land on some shiny, sunshiny island. There is one problem. If you want to communicate with banks from the real world, you will never be able to open an account if you need to pay salaries, or if you need fiat for your own expenses or whatever. You will not get the bank account. Or if you get the bank account, as you all know, there are some services which are providing bank accounts in somewhere, nowhere. Basically, you will not be operable if you want to have business in Europe or let's say civilized world. So basically, there is no way. This is just a dream. We all dream it someday, I guess.
Okay, we're stuck with being regulated and having nothing to say about it.
I may also add here, if I can.
Yes, go for it.
I do relate to this question asked that, okay, if you have a very burdensome regulations, then we will go to some offshore jurisdiction, or jurisdiction which does not regulate anything, and we will do our business. And this is really dangerous in terms of consumer protection. Not every consumer is really aware that the consumer needs to really check the business, whether this business needs a license or how reliable the business is. Because, for example, when I'm going to use any cryptocurrency service providers, I will always check if it's licensed, where it's registered, because if I'm going to invest my own money, I want to be sure that it's safe. So it's rather right now my advice to those users that are watching us at the moment, that it would be companies that would leave countries or European Union to go to another jurisdiction which is not regulated, but be also aware that regulation for you is actually really good because it protects you, it gives you some kind of protection. And if you use the services of those unregulated entities somewhere else, it's a risk for you that if something happens, if it will be hacked and cryptocurrency will be stolen, most probably you will not get your funds back, and there will not be liabilities for such companies.
This is a topic that I want to chip in as well a little bit. Just a really great question. Yes, I think while it might be for businesses enticing to go to like offshore jurisdictions because there might be kind of more relaxed approach to regulate crypto businesses. Again, as Raido pointed out correctly, bank accounts will become a problem. They are a problem even for regulated institutions or for companies established in European Union or elsewhere. And another thing is, yes, if it's also from the consumer perspective, like consumers would not really want to go to shady exchanges because we have so many examples of where if there would have been some regulatory control, a lot of disasters could be avoided. A good example, which I like, is the Canadian Quadriga CX issue, where there was kind of one founder of the exchange who presumably has died, and he took all the keys to the wallets with him. And it's not acceptable in a normal regulated environment that only a single person has access to all assets of the company. So if the company was properly regulated, obviously this risk would have been distributed, and it would be kind of a multi-signature wallet. There would be some redundancy in place, and that would never happen, and people would not lose their money. So again, I think people already had enough of examples where companies fail just because they are somewhere where they are not regulated, or at least not under the supervision of the regulators.
Thanks for the input. I'll move on to the next question. Actually, we have three more, I think. So what would be the best way for a crypto startup to acquire European customers without causing them to drop out during the onboarding due to the tedious KYC procedures, whilst the company is strictly complying with the new directive? All right. Anybody thinks they have the answer for that?
I can maybe start saying that it's really there is a correlation between how difficult is the customer onboarding and the chances that the customer will end it and will stay as a customer. But it's a business rather problem how actually to make it so efficient and smooth, at the same time being compliant. There are many service providers, KYC service providers, trust service providers, that your onboarding process can be fast, smooth, and easy. But it's mostly a business decision, I would say, rather than the legal, how to do it actually.
True. I mean, it does seem like there's too many pop-ups when you come to a website nowadays. That does break down the customer experience, in my opinion. So it is a business decision, but it's also a requirement by someone else that they cannot avoid and do business without. So kind of it has to be working both ways if it's to work for everybody. Okay.
I think if I can also add a little bit, I think, yes, it has to be a kind of a compromise between compliance and business. There is obviously a minimum requirements that the company needs to fulfill in terms of due diligence, but it's kind of close collaboration between the two, how to create a smooth, effortless user experience on the outside for the consumer, and also how to make all the clicks and checks internally to make sure that you satisfy the regulatory needs and regulatory applications. But it's always trying to balance these things, and also depends on the risk appetite of the company.
True. Some companies take a lot of risk. Cool. So we have a couple of more. What are the best forums to hire compliance specialists and AML officers in Europe? So people are already trying to hire somebody. Good advice. Would you recommend any places where you can find specialists in the area that would be able to help out? Raido?
In Estonia, probably so far, Financial Intelligence Unit belongs to Police and Border Guard Department. It would be good to have guys or ladies who have internal affair background, who have been studying in the same school where police people have been studying. So this is what they expect, actually, that they really are able to act as detectives. It's not in the law, but I understand, and this is what they expect from AML people.
Okay. All right. Then thank you, Raido, for this answer. We're going to move on to the last one, and then we're going to try to select which question was the best one and announce the winner. So the last question, and our viewer is saying, thanks for the great webinar on crypto and regulation. So the question is for Ivars, actually, specifically, and which compliance issues keeps you awake at night?
Compliance issues. That's an excellent question. I think for me, what is an endless effort is to automate things in a balanced way. I always strive to use technology within our controls, within our systems, and like striking this balance between using human interactions and human resources and like automation is what is quite challenging. We have a lot of tools and solutions nowadays with machine learning and artificial intelligence that are designed to identify fraud and suspicious activity and everything, but you can't always fully rely on them. You have to have some human interaction who would also supervise these systems and pick out the suspicious activity out of it. So for me, it's a constant struggle, like to find the right solution and right providers, to tweak them, to tailor them, to address the existing risk that we as a company have, and to what degree can we rely on these systems. So
Great.
I think that would be the main thing that is always in my head.
Oh, at least in that scenario, a human still participates in the process, so not.
Yeah, so it's not that bad. It's not the rise of the machines yet. So
Correct. So I won't be able to go to sleep because just that, not going to be substituted. All right. So let's vote on the best question. Does anyone remember one question out of their mind that they think was the best one? Who wants to say something?
For me, the best question was about regulation, and that this might result in companies leaving regulated jurisdiction and going to some other unregulated jurisdiction.
Does somebody else want to vote for this question?
Yeah, I'd like to support this question. That's something that I wanted to propose as well. I'd like this one.
Robert also puts his vote for the question. All right, we have 3 votes for the question about moving out of Europe because of regulations, right? Raido, do you remember any other question that you liked?
No, actually, I like the attitude of the question. So yes, I agree as well.
I mean, that's a unanimous decision. Thank you very much. So the user who submitted the question, if you're expecting that the answer to AML5 will be exchanges moving to countries with no regulation and taxes, and you're the winner of the $100 in cryptocurrency. So I hope you get in touch, or we will get in touch with you as well to give you the prize. And to all the speakers, unless you have any closing remarks that you would like to give to our viewers at the end, we can conclude the session. Very much thanks to CryptoMood, who is the host of this event. And for everybody watching, check out the app on Play Store as well as iTunes, or just go to the website to read more about CryptoMood on cryptomood.com. So if there is nothing else from the speakers, then we can say that we have done our job today very well. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Thanks to the viewers. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone.